Sekiro is a game about samurai and honor, taking place in the Sengoku era of Japan. But that historical backdrop does not stop Miyazaki from putting in a bunch of grotesque creatures. In fact, the ground setting gives him more motivation to add terrifying monsters pulled straight out of Japanese folklore. Every FromSoftware game has its scary enemies, but the ones in Sekiro carry a distinct layer of tragedy that is due to Japanese folklore. Whether they are fallen heroes driven mad by dark magic, beasts warped by stagnant waters, or spirits trapped by massive karmic debt, every terrifying encounter in this game has a brutal history attached to it. If we really want to understand these nightmares, we have to look past the immediate shock factor. We need to check out the folklore that inspired them, examine the environments they are trapped in, and figure out exactly how they ended up so grotesque. These are my picks for the most horrifying creatures in Sekiro. After you drop down a cave in the Ashina outskirts, you are met with a pretty grim sight. A tall, pale-bodied apparition with a severed head, wearing absolutely nothing but a traditional Japanese fundoshi, appears from the mist. This is the Headless, a giant, human-esque enemy wielding a massive, glowing purple katana. He is enormously tall with long arms and legs, but his body is incredibly saggy. Honestly, he looks like your overweight, skinny fat grandpa who drinks and curses all day after his retirement. And even though his head is completely severed, he still has hair hanging out of his neck stump. Actually, it's not even growing. It's more like hair fragments that got left behind on his chest and stomach when the blade went through his neck. Honestly, that is pretty gross. The sound design of this guy is incredibly creepy. Even when he's just breathing, it sounds like he's screaming right into your ears in some incomprehensible language. Sometimes it sounds like crying. His main voice sounds like his throat box is barely able to squeak out screams of agony. It is very high-pitched. It's so creepy, man. But there is one more part that is honestly more funny than terrifying. He screams in a way that sounds exactly like the sound your friend makes when he's hiding behind a door to jump scare you. I mean, hear it for yourself. The Headless fights in the weirdest ways. He leans back to an extreme degree just to do his overhead strikes and twist his body awkwardly to hit you. He also goes invisible and teleports to random places. And what is really weird is that whenever he comes out of invisibility, he is kneeling down. Every single time he teleports, he has to physically stand back up before swinging, and his attacks are painfully delayed. The first question everyone thinks about is, why is this creature headless? According to the item description of the spirit falls they drop, these guys are the ruined forms of Ashina's greatest military heroes, warriors named Akko, Ungo, Gokan, Gachin, and Yashariku. And all of these names might sound pretty familiar because they are names of sugars found throughout the game that give you different powers. They fought bravely for their country, but eventually lost their minds to the chaos and horrors of war. Ungo, for example, attempted a mutiny and was executed. During the Sengoku era, decapitation without being allowed to commit seppuku was the ultimate humiliation and punishment. That is why they were beheaded. If you don't know what seppuku is, it was a highly formalized ritual suicide reserved strictly for samurai to die with honor. Basically, the samurai would plunge a short blade into their own stomach and slice it open. To end the agonizing pain, a skilled swordsman standing behind them would immediately strike their neck. But the Headless never got that honor. If you look closely at their character models, there are 0 stomach wounds on any of them. They were denied a warrior's death and treated like common criminals. They were completely disgraced and brutally beheaded, which is exactly why their corpses rose back up as these massive, pissed-off apparitions. So why do they still wield katanas? Because their sheer malice and resentment wouldn't let them move on. The glowing swords they hold are actually odachi, massive, extra-long blades historically meant for killing horses on the battlefield. Soldiers usually had to carry these by hand because they were too incredibly long to pull from a sheath on their back. The fact that the Headless can swing them around with just one hand shows just how freakishly strong these heroes were in life. But to actually fight them, you can't just run up and start hacking away. You need an item called Divine Confetti, because the Headless inflict terror. What exactly is terror in Sekiro, you may ask? It is represented by this eerie purple energy, and it acts as a mix of supernatural curses and sheer psychological trauma. Merely standing near a Headless drives Wolf insane, because he is being exposed to the pure malice and excess karma of a vengeful ghost. Normal swords do almost nothing to them. Without a buff, your damage is literally reduced by 10 times. You have to bless your blade with Divine Confetti to cut through that supernatural barrier and put the spirit to rest. Let's talk about what terror actually does to you. If you check the description of the pacifying agent, the consumable powder you pop to cure the status effect, it reads, powdered medicine for calming nerves, used by those who deal in unspeakable deeds. Gravekeepers, executioners, the memorial mob, all who keep death close keep this powder closer, adhering to a simple rule. If seized with fear, cover your rear. The game is literally warning you in the item description about the Headless trying to rip your soul out of your butt. That is both hilarious and incredibly disturbing. See me after class. But the fear aspect is very real. In the world of Sekiro, terror isn't just Wolf getting a little spooked. When that purple bar fills up, he instantly dies. It is due to the sheer crushing weight of a tortured apparition forcing its malice into his mind all at once, literally stopping his heart on the spot. Let's take a closer look at the mottled purple gourd. This is a reusable flask that acts as a permanent solution to terror. The exact item description reads, a mottled purple gourd filled with medicinal water. This gourd's twisted form was formed in graveyards, corpse-strewn battlefields, and other forlorn places of death. It follows then that drinking its waters can help prevent the onset of terror. In Japanese folklore, and heavily throughout Sekiro, the color purple represents the spectral realm, curses, and the restless dead. The Headless swing glowing purple swords. Their terror aura is purple. The terror status bar on your screen is purple. And the cure is a mottled purple gourd. So, in Sekiro, I think the color purple is more associated with ghostly bodies and apparitions. It makes perfect sense when you think about it. This purple gourd is shaped by graveyards, and when you realize that the person who sells the item is an exiled memorial mob merchant hidden away in Mibu village, they live among the dead and harvest these from graveyards. And finally, we have the Divine Confetti. What even is this stuff, and why does it hurt apparitions? Its description reads, confetti imbued with a divine blessing made for driving away apparitions. The paper is made ceremoniously, whereby pulp is spread thin using water from the exalted fountainhead. As the gods bless the waters, so too will the confetti bless one who basks in its touch. So when Wolf rubs this glowing paper all over his katana, he is doing a holy ritual. This ceremonial paper was crafted using the sacred waters of the Fountainhead Palace, which is directly tied to the divine dragon. By scattering it all over his blade, he is essentially performing an exorcism by force. The holy blessing on the confetti scatters the Headless's dark fog, repels the lingering malice, and cuts through their supernatural barrier, allowing Wolf to actually slice into any apparition. However, the confetti alone does not completely neutralize the environmental hazards these creatures create. During the fight, the Headless will cast a mist around them that will slow your movement. To negate the effect, continuously land blows, and that will disperse the mist surrounding him. Headless also has an attack where he becomes invisible, only to reappear behind you and perform a grab attack. The Headless utilize this restricted movement to execute their most notorious maneuver. They vanish completely into the dark mist, only to appear directly behind the player. This connects back to the literal warning found on the pacifying agent. Cover your rear. If the player fails to turn around and dodge in time, the Headless initiates a brutal grab attack. It reaches into the bunda of the wolf and literally fiddles his hands inside his bunda and takes out a massive chunk of shit. Well, that is not literally shit, but the Headless is performing something called shirikodama. In traditional Japanese folklore, the shirikodama is a mythical jewel located in the lower intestines, believed to house the human soul. It is mostly commonly associated with the kappa, a water creature known for drowning victims and stealing this exact organ. The Headless shares a distinct parallel with the kappa. After ripping out Wolf's soul, the Headless, lacking a mouth, forces the shirikodama into his own body to consume it. So why on earth is a resurrected samurai performing a water demon's signature move? It all comes down to what losing your head actually symbolizes in Buddhist mythology. When these heroes were executed, they lost their minds, their bodies, their egos, and their human identities. The execution completely stripped them of who they were, leaving them entirely empty of literally anything humane. Because the Headless is now just an empty vessel driven purely by malice and regret, it is desperately trying to fill that void, which was kind of left behind. It is kind of starving for the humanity it lost. But here is the physical problem. Since it doesn't have a head, it doesn't have a mouth. So how does it consume the stolen soul when it doesn't have a face? It shoves it right up its own ass. I have seen so many gross grab attacks made by FromSoftware from literally every game they have made, but this is by far the grossest thing I've ever seen. No comments, honestly. The environmental placement of these entities further expands their individual histories, their locations, item descriptions, and the lore that they leave behind. The Headless associated with Gorkon is located deep in the Sunken Valley, surrounded by pyramid-shaped burial mounds. In historical contexts, these specific structures were often constructed to house severed heads. The local inhabitants likely built them to appease this specific spirit, offering it heads to replace the one lost in execution. To understand why Gorkon provides the specific buff, this particular specific buff I mean, we have to look at the deity his sugar represents. Kongo Yasha, known in Sanskrit as Vajrayaksha, one of the 5 great wisdom kings of Vajrayana Buddhism. Kongo Yasha is revered as the devourer of demons. In esoteric Buddhist traditions, the wisdom kings are fierce, wrathful manifestations designed to destroy obstacles to enlightenment. They are unshakable. To stand firm against demonic influence, practitioners of Vajrayana Buddhism engage in a complex meditative practice called deity yoga. They visualize themselves as these wrathful deities, temporarily dissolving their own sense of self to completely embody the divine immovable attributes of the Wisdom King. The tragedy of Gokan ties directly into how Ashina misuses these religious practices. Historically, esoteric tantric rituals were sometimes adapted by rulers to provide a supernatural defense for their political territories. The Ashina clan might have done exactly this. They took the sacred visualization of the Kongo Yasha and weaponized it for border defense. Gokang was likely an enforcer or a heavy defender, ordered to embody the devourer of demons to hold the line against overwhelming odds. He was asked to be the unshakable center of Ashina's military, but you cannot channel wrathful demonic crushing energy indefinitely without it taking a toll on your mind. The esoteric practices that were meant to lead to enlightenment were corrupted by the sheer trauma of war. Gokan's mind broke under the pressure of the violence he witnessed and committed. The immovable defender became a threat, leading to his execution and transformation into a headless. This is exactly what happens mechanically when you use the Spirit Fall. He assumes the form of Kongo Yasha to anchor his mind and body, making his posture practically unbreakable against monstrous attacks. Another one is Gachin's. He is a headless and is isolated in the deepest sections of the hidden forest. The item description gives away what actually happened to him. "I'm falling to pieces," said the man to himself, drifting deep into the forest. Gachin realized his mind was fracturing. Rather than face execution or cause harm to his allies, he chose to wander in the dense woods entirely alone, where he eventually succumbed to his madness and transformed. The isolation completely changes the context of his transformation. Gachin was not dragged to the chopping block and executed for mutiny like Ungo. He actively felt his own sanity slipping away. Instead of turning his blade on his allies or forcing them to put him down, he made the tragic choice to exile himself. He wandered into the dense, foggy woods of the hidden forest to die entirely alone. This tragic end translates directly into the gameplay mechanic of his Spirit Fall. When you activate Gachin's power, Wolf's footsteps go completely silent, and his physical body becomes semi-transparent, making him difficult for enemies to detect. Gachin literally faded away from the world in his final moments, and now his spirit grants you the ability to do the exact same thing. But there is more. If you look at the visual icon for the Gachin Sugar or the Spirit Fall, it depicts a multi-armed figure resembling a Buddha or a Bodhisattva figure, traditionally associated with enlightenment, tranquility, and peace. Unlike the other Ashina heroes whose powers are inherently violent, boosting your vitality, damage, breaking posture, or cutting your own health in half for raw attack power, compared to all of this, Gachin's blessing is entirely passive and is deemed as being more peaceful, similar to the practices of Buddha. Let's now talk about Akko and Ungo first. These two are a matched set, and you cannot really talk about one without the other. If you look closely at their item icons, they are direct references to the Neo, the fearsome guardian deities that traditionally flank the entrance gates of Japanese Buddhist temples. Starting with Akko, this sugar gives you a massive boost to your vitality and posture damage. The icon for Akko represents Kuyapada, known in Japan as Mishaku Kongo. According to Buddhist iconography, Mishaku Kongo is the ultimate symbol of overt, explosive violence. In traditional statues, he is always depicted baring his teeth, with his mouth wide open to form the ah or ha sound. He is depicted either barehanded or wielding a sword. Then you have Ungo, which acts as the exact opposite. Consuming his sugar drastically reduces the vitality damage you take. His icon represents Narayana, known in Japan as Narayan Kongo. Unlike Mishaku Kongo, explosive rage, Narayan Kongo symbolizes talent, essentially contained strength. His statues are depicted either bare-handed or holding a sword, but the most defining detail is his face. His mouth is always tightly shut, forming the un or hum sound. He is holding his energy in. He is the immovable object, bracing to absorb an impact rather than lashing out. When you pop an Ungo sugar, Wolf channels the exact closed mouth grounded stance to endure heavy blows. Together, the ah and sounds from these two guardians form representing the beginning and the end of all things. Akko is the explosive opening strike. Ungo is the unshakable defense. Let's look at the literal text for Akko Spiritfall. Fallen headless spirit of Akko that increases vitality and posture damage for a time, seizing the power of an inhuman spirit by laying it to rest, but risk going quite mad unless something is offered in return. Akko is the embodiment of explosive violence. His power grants raw, unadulterated offense, but the description reveals the horrifying cost of that power. He's labeled as a corrupted hero. Akko was entirely consumed by the act of killing. The violence of war corrupted him into an inhuman spirit long before his head was actually severed. Ungo's story is far more tragic and heavily tied to his defensive mechanics. His spiritfall reads, Fallen headless spirit of Ungo that reduces vitality damage taken from physical attacks. This warrior lost his mind in defense of the state. His attempted mutiny was met with a swift beheading and the lifeless body sunk to the bottom of the moat. This is environmental storytelling at its finest. Ungo symbolizes the closed mouth guardian of endurance. The text tells us that he lost his mind in defense of the state. He was a patriot who fought so hard for Ashina that it broke him. But unlike his other half, who became a mindless killer, Ungo's madness manifested as clarity. He saw the horrific lengths his country was going to, perhaps the research in the dungeons or the deployment of children in war, and he decided to stop it. He attempted a mutiny. In the middle of a war, turning against your own comrades requires immense endurance. You have to brace yourself to absorb the punishment of your entire military turning against you. That is exactly why his spiritfall reduces physical damage. He failed and was given a swift beheading, and his disgraced corpse was unceremoniously dumped into the moats like garbage. And if you know your Sekiro map, you know exactly where you find Ungo's headless body. He is entirely submerged, haunting the waters of the moat, directly behind Ashilan Castle. The final and most extreme of the headless spirits is Yashariku. This sugar and spiritfall are infamous in the Sekiro community for their sheer risk. They are kind of like the red tearstone rings of Sekiro. Using it briefly grants a massive boost to attack power, but it comes at a severe cost. It immediately cuts your maximum vitality and posture directly in half. Most players look at this purely as a high-risk, high-reward item for speedrunners, but if you read the item description, you realize that halving your health is a literal manifestation of Yashariku's existence. The description reads, This brave soul's twin was lost in utero. He may not have fallen to the palace nobles had his siblings been at his side. Unlike Akko, Ungo, or Gokan, whose powers stem from the madness of war or the strain of mutiny, Yashariku's condition is congenital. He was supposed to be one of the two. In Japanese folklore and spiritual traditions, twins are often viewed as a single soul split across two bodies. Because his twin died in the womb, Yashariku lived his entire life as half of a whole. He was spiritually and physically incomplete. This is exactly why his spirit fall halves your vitality and posture. When Wolf crushes his sugar or channels this spirit, he is simulating Yashariku's and therefore cutting his physical vitality into half. The lore also tells us exactly how he died. The other heroes were executed by Ashina's military, their bodies dumped in local moats or forests. But Yashariku's description specifically states that he fell to the palace nobles. This tells us two things. First, it shows how exceptionally strong he was. He managed to reach the Fountainhead Palace, the highest and most heavily guarded spiritual realm in the game. Second, it explains the cruel irony of his death. The palace nobles are enemies that attack by inflicting the enfeeble status effect, which instantly drains your youth, slowing you down and reducing your maximum health to a fraction of its total. Yashariku, a man who already operated with half a soul, was subjected to a curse that drained whatever vitality he had left. The text implies that if his twin had survived, their combined spiritual weight would have been enough to resist the nobles' enfeebling magic. Instead, he died alone, drained of his life force. And if you explore the deep waters of the Fountainhead Palace, you will find Yashariku's headless corpse submerged right where he was murdered by them. But there is one final incredible tragic detail about Yashariku that FromSoftware hid directly in the fight. Whenever you dive to the bottom of the lake to fight him, you immediately notice something is wrong. Every other headless fight in the game is a strict one-on-one duel, but Yashariku is not alone. Fighting right beside him in the dark water is a second transparent phantom headless. At first glance, it feels just like FromSoftware being cruel and artificially increasing the difficulty by throwing a gang fight at you. But there's a catch. The item description explicitly told us he may not have fallen to the palace nobles had his sibling been at his side. Yashariku died because he was incomplete. It was only after he was murdered, disgraced out into a vengeful spirit, that his missing half finally manifested. They are finally reunited at the bottom of the lake, but only as cursed headless monsters. That is what I love about FromSoftware, you know? They were inspired by Buddhism and Japanese mythology, but they mostly never reference them directly. Instead, they find clever ways to use it and implement these into items and enemies. Analyzing the headless was the most fun I've ever had during any investigation, as how FromSoftware integrates these tidbits into the game is so absurdly clever. At the very bottom of the sunken valley lies one of the prettiest areas in the game. You step into the Bodhisattva Valley. It is a peaceful valley with statues of Buddhas and a ton of monkeys. Toward the end of this section lies a beautiful watering hole, overseen by a massive weathered statue of the Buddha. The water is clear, the lighting is soft, everything just looks right, until you spot a massive white creature, back turned to you and just minding its own business. It looks so peaceful, but I think I spoke too soon. The second you get close, this thing turns ape shit, and I literally mean that. Just look at this thing. It welcomes you by throwing a huge pile of shit. It thrashes around, screams, and yes, if the pile of shit was not enough, he also lets out a huge fart if you stay behind his back too long. Beyond the shits and the farts, that's something else I never thought I'd ever say in my life, but here we are. If you look at his design, you're immediately stuck with a lot of oddities. Its fur is stained red with blood. A massive scar runs down its face. leaving it blind in one eye. And most importantly, there is a giant nodachi shoved straight through its neck, sticking out on the other side. Seems like someone tried to kill this beast a long time ago, but they failed. To figure out who left the sword, we need to look at what happens when you finally beat the ape in the first phase. It drops an item called the Slender Finger. The slender finger of a young woman can be fitted to the shinobi prosthetic to create a prosthetic tool, found in the belly of a guardian ape. It is partially digested. There is a shinobi technique called the finger whistle that can drive beasts wild. The one who used it before clearly used it for this purpose, as evidenced by the finger's open hole. Let's pull this description apart piece by piece. First, look at the phrase partially digested. Whoever fought the ape was swallowed whole. This piece of bone is simply the only part of them that hasn't completely dissolved in the beast's stomach acid over the years. Second, it belonged to a young woman. That massive sword sticking out of the ape's neck was wielded by a female shinobi who had the raw strength to drive a blade that size completely through the muscle and bone of a giant ape. Lastly, look at the mechanics of the whistle itself. The open hole used to drive beasts wild. She blew air directly into her hand to create a piercing sound to drive the guardian ape wild, presumably to stun him and find an opening. When you bring this partially digested finger back to the dilapidated temple, the sculptor recognizes it immediately. But he doesn't just hand you the backstory right away. He simply asks Wolf where he found it. When Wolf replies that he pulled it from the stomach of a giant ape, the sculptor is visibly surprised, but he quickly shuts the conversation down. He keeps the pain to himself. To actually get the truth out of him, you have to loosen his tongue with a very specific item called the monkey booze. Hand him a cup of this, and the walls finally calm down. He drinks it and delivers one of the most revealing pieces of dialogue.
酒を持ってきた。
猿酒か。相も変わらず辛い酒だ。だが、これが懐かしい。
よく飲んでいたのか。
猿どもの住む谷。そこで忍び修行をしておった。
一人か。
いや、二人でじゃな。わしらははぐれ忍び。まともな死はもはやおらなんだ。故に落ちれば死ぬる谷でただひたすらにかけ飛び刃を交える。そのような修行を重ねた。じき猿と変わらぬほどには動けるようになったわ。修行に飽きるとわしはこの猿酒を飲んだ。そしてあやつの泣き虫の指笛を聞いた。
泣き虫？
変わった指輪があってな。それをはめて指笛を吹くと谷に悲しげな音が響き渡るのじゃ。不思議とわしはその音が好きでな。よう吹いてもらったものよ。
You hear that? There is actually a massive amount of character packed into these few lines. Let's break it down. First, he explicitly calls them rogue shinobi, who had no proper master. They weren't elite Ashina shadows or Senpo temple assassins. They were completely on their own, outcasts who had to teach themselves how to survive. Because they had no master to train them, they went to the most dangerous place they could find, the sunken valley. They fought on the edge of cliffs, clashing swords in an environment where one slip could mean your doom. They trained until they could move exactly as monkeys did. This exactly explains the sculptor's past. It's why he was known in his youth as the orangutan. It is why his signature weapon, the shinobi axe, is described as the tool of the bounding monkey. He and his partner, Kingfisher, essentially became the apex predators of the valley by adopting the fighting style of the apes. But the most heartbreaking part of this dialogue is how he talks about the whistle itself. From the slender fingers item description, we know the whistle was used to drive beasts into a murderous frenzy. But to the sculptor, it was more than that. When they were exhausted from dodging death all day, Kingfisher would blow through the hollowed-out ring, and the sound would fill the toxic valley with a somber melody. He loved that sound. He sat back, drank his monkey booze, and listened to it constantly. It was the soundtrack to the only piece he ever really knew. That exact sound, the one that brought the sculptor peace, ended up being Kingfisher's last resort. In her final fight against the colossal ape, she blew the whistle, hoping to stun the beast and break its focus. The whistle threw the ape into a blind, uncontrollable rage. In the chaos, she managed to plunge her massive sword entirely through its neck, a strike that kills any living creature on the spot, except the ape survived. It kept moving through the pain and swallowed her whole. To understand how the beast survived a decapitating blow, you must have a look at the water pooling around your feet in the Bodhisattva Valley. The water here flows all the way down from the Fountainhead Palace at the peak of the mountain. These magical waters grant a corrupted form of eternal life. When they settle in deep pools, they stagnate and breed giant, immortal centipedes. The guardian ape lived its life drinking from this very pool. It ingested one of these parasites, which latched onto its spine and kept the host functioning long after Kingfisher's blade severed its arteries. You actually see this parasite in action during the fight. When you deflect the ape's massive overhead sword slam in the second phase, it falls flat. Using the loaded spear tool on its severed neck lets you drag the centipede out for massive posture damage. Speaking of that second phase, when you deplete the first health bar, grab Kingfisher's sword by the hilt and rip the head clean off. The screen flashes Shinobi Execution. You breathe out a sigh of relief and you put your controller down. Then the headless corpse twitches. It reaches out and grabs the giant's sword, scoops up its own severed head, and stands back up. To understand why the beast fought so hard in the first place, walk to the back of the arena. You find a flower called Lotus of the Palace, whose item description provides very interesting insights. A white lotus flower found blooming in the depths of the sunken valley, where the fountainhead water pools deeply. The flower's aroma attracts female apes, thus the guardian ape carefully tended to it, so as to offer it to his bride. One of the incense ingredients sought by the divine heir of the immortal Severance. Wow, I was not expecting that. I genuinely thought that the ape was there for immortality, or rather the cave inside, where the flower was blooming. It was a surprisingly cozy place to call home. But it looks like this giant, terrifying, shit-throwing monster was just incredibly lonely. He was carefully tending a garden just to find a bride. To see the full picture of just how sad this is, we have to look at the remnant headless ape. At one time, the guardian ape shared its den with a male, but he alone became infested, while the others passed away. Now even the flowers offered in tribute to her passing have withered to dust. His immortality was a curse. He lived forever while his original mate grew old and died. If you look up in the caves above the Ashina depths, in the same arena where you fight the Headless Cave, there is a really nice secret info found. If you go up to the portion where you find the monkey booze at all, there is an actually huge corpse with brown fur. Looking at it, from the size and anatomy of the skeleton, It's more than evident that this belonged to another ape, which was probably a potential mate to the ape that we fought. And yes, why did the headless even retreat back to his original den? It's because you didn't kill the centipede in the valley, as prior to the encounter, you did not have the mortal blade to permanently sever the centipede. Due to this, the ape retreats to the Ashina depths. You find him at the end of a cave where he is desperately trying to drink the immortal water in a shallow stream to heal his wounds. If you drop down and force him into another fight, halfway through the battle, the headless beasts let out a deep, echoing howl, and suddenly, a brown ape jumps down from the ceiling to defend him. This is very interesting, as based on everything we just looked at, we know for a fact that his original mate passed away a long time ago. Her bones are literally resting in the cavern right above this arena. So, who is this brown ape? The answer lies in the memory you received after the very first fight. The remnant guardian ape drops this devastating little detail. The guardian ape was defeated, though its roar can still be heard. Perhaps the echoing roar of the guardian ape was in fact a solicitation of sorts. Maybe this was a mating call? Against all odds, it actually worked. Between the intoxicating aroma of the lotus he spent an eternity tending and that desperate howl echoing through the valley, a new female ape heard him and answered it. This wraps up the tragedy of the guardian ape. But looking at everything we just broke down, it leaves us with two massive unanswered questions about the entire ordeal. First, when you chopped off the ape's head, how did a beast with absolutely no sword training suddenly know how to wield a massive nodachi? And second, what actually happens to Kingfisher after you find her ring? Let's tackle the sword first. When you sever the head, the fight fundamentally changes. The shinobi firecrackers completely stop working. The game officially reclassifies the ape from a beast to an apparition. The centipede takes the control, but if you watch its attack patterns, it is more moved deliberately, even though it looks unprofessional and all over the place. The ape swallowed Kingfisher whole. In the world of Sekiro, souls and memories frequently bind to the physical world. It is heavily implied that the parasite absorbed Kingfisher's muscle memory along with her body. This directly ties into the second question. When you kill the Sishmen warrior in the Ashina depths and claim the malcontent ring, you get to read the description. Ring of a person who calls themselves Kingfisher. Can be used to upgrade the finger whistle prosthetic tool worn by Kingfisher on her slender finger. Peering through the ring creates a somber tone. A crying voice is full of sorrow and will cause even apparitions to briefly forget their rage. When you hand this ring to the sculptor, he takes the last remaining piece of his dead partner and uses it to upgrade the finger whistle into its final form, the malcontent.
お前さん、その指笛はきっと悲しげな。じゃが、いい音を鳴らすじゃろう。うまく使ってやってくれ。
He knows exactly what he is asking you to do, but the real tragedy lies in what this specific tool is actually meant for. The malcontent whistle is designed to stun apparitions, but it has one specific application late in the game. It is the primary weakness of the demon of hatred. The sculptor knows his karma is catching up to him. He knows the flames of hatred are going to consume his humanity. By fitting Kingfisher's ring into your prosthetic arm, he is handing you the exact weapon you need to kill him. He ensures that when he finally loses his mind and turns into a monster, the sound of the dead partner's whistle will be the only thing that cuts through his rage. It stops him in his tracks, giving you the opening to step in and put him out of his misery. When you take a step back and look at the entire narrative arc, the story of these two is oddly similar to Gammon and Lady Maria from Bloodborne. You have an aging, amputated mentor sitting alone in a hub area, completely consumed by the grief of losing his deeply skilled female partner. Both men cling to a singular memento of the woman they lost, letting the sorrow quietly eat away at them over the years. And in both stories, the mentor turns into a monstrous late-game boss that you are ultimately forced to put down. That is such a beautiful way to end the story of the Guardian Ape. You walk into that valley expecting a fight, but who would have expected that the story of the Guardian Ape would be filled with love and companionship, which ultimately connects to the story of the sculptor and his companion. This is exactly what makes FromSoftware storytelling so effective. Sekiro has a much more direct and linear narrative compared to their other games. Well, that clearly does not stop them from hiding these devastating character arcs right there in the middle of item descriptions and environmental details. You just have to be willing to piece it all together. The land of Ashina hides many horrifying creatures, but it is far from having the most terrifying beings. In another dimension, in another world, which is greatly shrouded by fallen kings and lords, you will find some of the most eerie enemies ever created. Let us take a step back and change our focus by investigating the most horrifying creatures in Dark Souls 3.